Welcome to your Module 11 assignment. Today we are going to be talking all about grit. And just because you've made it all the way to Module 11, you have shown true grit to get here. It's not a word that you hear every day. We all know about natural talent and high IQ scores, but what is grit? Angela Duckworth is the leading expert on grit, and she says it's the much hyped ingredient in personal success. As Duckworth defines it, grit is passion and sustained persistence applied to long-term achievement with no particular concern for rewards or recognition along the way. It combines resilience, ambition, and self-control in the pursuit of goals that take months, years, or even decades. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future day in and day out, not just for the week, but for years. Grit is living your life like it's a marathon and not a sprint. A person with true grit has passion and perseverance. Goals are set and followed through. A person who works really hard to follow through on their commitments has true grit. Talent counts, but effort counts twice. Talent doesn't make you gritty. I know a lot of talented individuals who simply don't follow through on their commitments. Grit is not related to talent, social status, or environment. Effort applied to skill creates human achievement. When we consistently practice something, we put in the effort required to achieve or reach that goal. If we don't continuously practice or use a skill, we lose the skill that we worked so hard to acquire. Think of a sport you used to play, a skill, or a language that you learned and then stopped using. Would you be able to pick it up where you left off if you had to start again now? For example, when I was traveling, I lived in Vietnam for 2 years. I had to learn Vietnamese in order to get by. I was constantly practicing and I got really good at it. Eventually, I moved back to South Africa and completely stopped using the new language skill that I had acquired. A year later, I went back on holiday and I could only remember the basics. I had forgotten most of what I had learned just because I hadn't been practicing consistently. Research shows that there are 5 main characteristics that people who have grit exhibit. I'm going to take you through all of them today. The first of which being courage. Well, courage is hard to measure. It's directly related to grit. Courage is not being afraid to fail. It means that failure is imperative to success. The extremely gritty embrace failure as a part of the process. They expect it. They know that there are valuable lessons to be learned and persevere through the hard times. Teddy Roosevelt spoke about the importance of overcoming fear and managing vulnerability in an address he made in 1907. He stated, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how strong the man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strived valiantly, who errs, who comes again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great devotions, who spends himself on a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." Courage is like a muscle. It has to be exercised daily. If you do, it will grow, and ignored, it'll atrophy. Courage helps fuel grit. The two are symbiotic, feeding into and off of each other. And you need to manage each and how they are functioning together. So when you fall off the horse, will you be courageous enough to get back on? The second characteristic of a gritty person is conscientiousness. The dictionary definition of conscientiousness is the quality of wishing to do one's work or duty well and thoroughly. A good example of a conscientious person would be someone you know who's always planning ahead for the next time that you meet, and in the meantime, regularly staying in contact and checking in on your well being. They like to organize around certain dates and events and are focused on you when you meet. A highly conscientious person will regularly plan ahead and analyze their own behavior to see what their effect is on the world around them. People low in conscientiousness tend to dislike structure and schedules. They procrastinate on important tasks and they fail to complete tasks well. Conscientiousness is also sometimes described as being dependable, but dependability by itself isn't what makes you gritty. Conscientiousness in this context means careful and painstaking, meticulous. But in a 1992 study, the educator Alan Hugh found the definition to be far more nuanced when applied to tenacity. Hugh's study distinguished achievement from the dependability aspects of conscientiousness. The achievement-oriented individual is one who works tirelessly, tries to do a good job, and completes the task at hand, whereas the dependable person is more notably self-controlled and conventional. Not surprisingly, Hugh discovered that achievement-oriented traits predicted job proficiency and educational success far better than dependability. So a self-controlled person who may never step out of line may fail to reach the same heights as their more unpredictable friends. In other words, in the context of conscientiousness, grit and success, it's important to commit to go for gold rather than show up for practice. The third characteristic of grit is perseverance. Perseverance is having long-term goals and endurance. Follow through. As I mentioned in the introduction, talent counts, but effort counts twice. Duckworth says, and I quote, "Achievement is the product of talent and effort, the latter a function of the intensity, direction, and the duration of one's exertions towards a long-term goal. Practice must have purpose to keep moving forward." This is where long-term goals come into play. They provide the context and framework that helps us find meaning and value in our long-term efforts, which helps cultivate drive, sustainability, passion, courage, stamina, and grit. When we keep our goals in mind, they help us persevere through the difficult days. Perseverance helps us show up, even if we're having a bad day. Goals keep our minds set and act as our North Star. Perseverance keeps us moving forward towards those goals, guiding us to success. The fourth characteristic of grit is resilience. Of course, on your journey to greatness, you're going to stumble. You will need to get back up and dust yourself off many times. Resilience gives us the strength to continue moving forward and helps us persevere despite the obstacles we face along the way. But what is resilience? It's defined as optimism, creativity, and confidence. Lucy Hone, a resilience expert, shared her experience on resilience after the devastating personal loss of her daughter in her famous TED Talk, The Three Secrets to Resilient People. Set aside some time to watch her TED Talk. I'll link the video in the description of this lesson. Lucy's research found that resilient people have three things in common. Firstly, resilient people get that bad things happen. We live in an age where everything is filtered. Perfect photos on Instagram show only a small part of one's reality. Resilient people understand that there's a greater story behind the perfect lives that we're sold on social media and get that suffering is a part of life. Bad things happen every day, and that's the price we pay for human existence. Secondly, resilient people are good at choosing where they put their attention. They typically manage to focus on things that they can change and somehow accept the things that they can't. Resilient people know how to find the good in every situation. Don't get me wrong, They don't tune out the negative, but they are aware of their blessings and focus on gratitude where they can. Remember the circle of influence, control, and concern? Asking oneself, what can I control in this situation and what is out of my control, is a good place to begin. Finally, resilient people ask themselves, is what I'm doing helping or harming me? This one really hit home for me because it's just a simple statement that we can use on the daily. It's maybe something as simple as choosing what we're going to have for lunch. Is this good for me or is this bad for me? This can be applied to all aspects of our lives, physical, mental, and our emotional well-being. Ask yourself whether the way that you're acting, the way that you're thinking, is helping you or harming you. That puts you back in the driver's seat and gives you some control over your decision making. The fifth characteristic of grit is passion. Passionate people have a deep sense of purpose. They generally have a very clear sense of their values and beliefs, and they live by them. They are driven by their goals and they focus on results. They have a if there is a will, there is a way attitude, and they don't accept no for an answer. By the same token, they are also enthusiastic about the success of others. Finally, they take responsibility for their lives but are not afraid to ask for support. Passionate people recognize that they are in the driver's seat as they travel on their journey through life. So, how do we grow our grit? There are a few things that you can start doing today to become grittier on your ladder to success. The first is developing a curiosity for things. There's a quote that says, "Curiosity is the compass that leads to our passions. Follow it and you won't be disappointed." The future belongs to the curious. When we become curious, we kickstart an adventure of lifelong learning. When we develop a fascination for things, we often can go down a path or learn something that we didn't expect. Curiosity opens our minds to new ideas or ways of doing things, and our mindsets begin to shift. Find the questions that fascinate you and grow from there. Practice like an expert. But how do experts practice? Surprisingly, it's not the amount of time that we spend practicing something, but the quality of our practice that matters. When you ask an expert what they're working on today, they'll most likely give you some very complicated and detailed explanation of a certain aspect of what they're focusing on. They are very aware of the specific part of performance or the job that they're working on that day. Let's take an Olympic swimmer, for example. If you ask them what they're focusing on, they wouldn't say swimming. They would mention a stroke, a turn, or even keeping a consistent depth or breath underwater. Experts are not afraid to constantly reflect on their performance and try to identify ways to improve. In fact, they're actively looking for ways to improve. They're looking for mistakes. They also understand how to break down their performance into smaller parts and focus on each aspect with full effort and concentration. They will give 100% focus to the learning at hand without outside distractions. The key is to compete with who you were yesterday. How can you carve out time each day to improve on what you're doing now? Find purpose. What greater meaning does your work have to you? Understanding your motivation and purpose for doing what you do helps keep the bigger picture in mind. Once we have the big picture, we can use it as a driving force to do great things. Start with Why is a famous talk by Sinek in which he explains the golden circle. I'll link his video in the description of this lesson. His talk is actually aimed at businesses, but it can be applied to our personal lives as well. When we understand our why, we know our motivation for doing what we do. We can ask for what we need, and every decision we make is traced back to our why. Everyone knows what they do. Some know how they do it, but not many people know why they do what they do. When we think, act, and communicate from the inside out, our goals are clear and we can easily communicate our purpose with others. It's good to keep in mind that our purpose may change as we change. In different stages of our lives, we will have different purposes. When we're building our careers, we have a purpose. When we become parents, we have a purpose. Our purposes shift. Our obsession with finding one main purpose can often take us away from finding many amazing ones. So the key is not to limit your purpose. The final thing that we can do is adopt a growth mindset. I know. How many times do we have to say it? A growth mindset is essential to any aspect of personal growth, and that's why we always circle back to it here at Khwela Women. Remember, learning isn't fixed, it's something that we can grow. The brain changes as we learn new skills. Our brain can be molded with effort. Remember, talent counts, but effort counts twice. And if you're willing to put in the work, you can achieve great things. You grow, girl.